Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for our session, When the Sky is Not the Limit, Managing Capped Open Access Agreements. I'm Maureen Walsh, Scholarly Sharing Strategist for the Ohio State University Libraries. I'm joined by Amy Pawlowski, Executive Director of OhioLINK, Brian C. Gray, Associate Dean of Collections, University of Cincinnati Libraries, and Shannon Gordon, Customer Success Manager, Elsevier. This session begins with brief introductory slides and then features a dialogue between myself and our panelists on the opportunities and challenges of setting up cost-neutral open access publishing agreements and managing capped allocations. A reminder of the Code of Conduct, and a reminder to use a microphone and to identify yourselves by name and affiliation when asking questions. I'll now turn it over to Amy to start us off.
Good morning. Yes, we're still morning. Good morning, everyone. Just to make sure everyone understands the context through which we're working with our capped agreements, I'm going to talk a little bit about OhioLINK and how we're set up to work through these agreements. So bear with me. Some of you know I had a weird eye thing, so I'm sorry I'm not looking out. I'm going to read from my phone here. But just to give you an idea of OhioLINK, we are more or less every nonprofit academic library across the state of Ohio. So you can see our makeup there. Our charters are all of our public 4 years plus Case Western and University of Dayton. And then we also have 47 private institutions, and that ranges in sizes, all of the community colleges, and then a lot of our 4 years have regional campuses. And since law and medical schools are separate, we do count those as their own members. So that's more or less the makeup of OhioLINK. Okay. To set the table for how we work, I think this is pretty obvious at this point, is, when you have different size institutions working together, you have institutions that tend to lean towards just reading, and those that lean towards read and publishing, and those that maybe lean heavily towards publishing and reading. So when we decided to step into capped agreements for OhioLINK, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping it as equitable as possible for all of our members. All of our members needed to find value out of these deals that were coming out. So what we decided to do was set up what we call 3 cohorts. Internally, we call them buckets of institutions based on their output, publishing output for an average of the last 3 years. And it turns out that that comes to a third, a third, a third. So the first cohort is actually the Ohio State University all by itself. The second cohort is Case Western, the Cleveland Clinic, University of Cincinnati. And then the third cohort is more or less the long tail, so everybody else. And it just so happens that that equals out to each a third of publishing output. What happens with capped agreements is we assign an equal amount of article tokens, whatever you want to call them, per bucket. So that way there's an equal distribution. And again, everyone sees value coming out of the deals there. So this was just a slide to kind of express the, read versus publishing and how that all breaks down. Okay, and then just to give you an idea of OhioLINK's OA output, it has really grown, but we have added deals over time as well. So this is in 2022 dealing with just the Cambridge and Wiley agreements, and then as we added them, how our publishing is going up. This last slide for 2024 is only through Q2, so this was of July. So you can already see that these are growing in use and popularity, and we're doing pretty good about keeping the distribution well. One more note on how we're set up. Each cohort has approvers. So for example, Brian is an approver for that second cohort, although he switched institutions. He switched to an institution in his own cohort, so it didn't cause a lot of challenges there. And then we manage the approving from the central offices, so making sure that the right amount of credits have been applied, that if there's something gets turned down, we have Joanna Voss at the office who's watching closely and making sure that everything is accounted for and tracked appropriately. Okay, that was probably over a minute.
Thanks, Amy. Just briefly for the Ohio State University Libraries, as one facet of our support of open access publishing, which includes Diamond Open Access, to subscribe to open, community-supported scholarly infrastructure, the Ohio State University Libraries currently has 13 read and publish or pure publish agreements, 5 of which are with OhioLINK, and 3 of those are capped: Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley. Our OhioLINK cohort has 2 approvers, myself and our collection strategist. The 3 OhioLINK capped agreements use publisher-specific dashboards with their own take on the mechanisms and data provided for approving funding requests, tracking and reporting agreement usage on the cohort and consortium level, and back office functions for turning off agreements when caps are reached. Ohio State did reach our 2024 caps with 2 publishers, and it'll be a close race to the end of December for the 3rd. With our capped agreements, we track the uptake and begin campus-wide and library communications as to the status of our allocations as soon as we are projecting we may reach the limit prior to the end of the calendar year. Brian?
And as Amy mentioned, I actually switched organizations during all this. So I was at Case Western for a few months short of 20 years and highly involved with the OE deals there. And now I'm at the University of Cincinnati, so only 4 weeks in. So I apologize today if I look down at a few notes just to keep things straight in my own mind. But the nice thing is the 3 institutions cohort had similar outputs, similar strategies when it comes to research and publishing. And so it's become a really natural, almost peer group to have conversations about how these programs are working. The 3 of us work very independently until we get towards the end as we're starting to approach our cap. And then we're constantly communicating by email, giving ideas of, yeah, I know this is in the pipeline. This is coming up. Keep an eye out for this. But then we also start using the 3 of us to brainstorm, like how are we going to communicate to authors, faculty, administrators about the limitations? How is this going to work? What language are we using? The other nice thing is Cleveland Clinic and Case are practically across the street from each other, have a lot of shared researchers. So we're always troubleshooting, like, are they claiming the correct institution for this publication? And as Maureen said, each of the institutions also have 2 or more people that are approving. And so there's backups built in at each of the institutions to make sure nothing's sitting and maybe harming the cap.
So let's clarify within Brian's.
Yep.
Brian's talking about communication within his cohort.
Correct.
So Case,
Correct.
the clinic, and UC, and then Maureen is her own cohort. Yep. But then we also have a 3rd cohort, which is everybody else. So 60, 70 some odd institutions, and there are a group of 3 or 4 approvers that work on approving everything for that cohort instead of having one person at each institution, and it keeps it more streamlined and a little easier. But not only do they talk amongst Brian's group themselves and the 3rd cohort, but we all meet together on a regular basis. And these are the things we're going to start digging into that we talk about.
Yep.
Shannon.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. So I'm Shannon. My role is as a customer success manager with a customer success team with Elsevier, as Maureen mentioned. And the reason that I'm here is really to share some insight. And again, we're really wanting to focus on the practical and to kind of break things down in an understandable way to demystify what happens once a read and publish agreement is in place. And if you do take a peek at the slide, I encourage everyone to envision a mega stuff Oreo. And if you can picture one of those cookies, we can think of the cookie pieces as being the negotiation and renewal phases. I'm sure everyone is familiar with those, at least at kind of a high level as a concept, theoretically. And then, of course, we have the icing. So today, the icing is going to be the kickoff phase when the agreement is implemented and launched, usually the first 3 months or so. And then after that, you really do have that steady state. So once the agreement is in place, it is live. Your local authors are seeing that as an option when they're going through their post-acceptance author journey. So that's what we'll be diving into. And I know we have been kind of working closely together this year. I have been one of the people at Elsevier who has been supporting the OhioLINK read and publish agreement. But again, it takes a village. So I think you'll also have a chance just to learn about, behind the scenes, who are the different people, the different teams that support this type of agreement on the publisher side. I recognize I'm kind of representing Elsevier, but I'm sure a lot of this, to a certain extent, will also echo, some of the practices for other publishers as well. So hoping to have an open discussion about it.
Thank you. So all of us on this panel are navigating how best to support researchers and optimize open access agreements and business processes. How can open access publishing agreements work for everyone? consortia, universities, authors, and publishers. I'm going to ask a series of questions of our panelists to try and unpack the opportunities and challenges stemming from the limited resources of libraries and consortia in an ever-expanding open scholarship marketplace, and the approaches in practice now, or that our panelists hope to see implemented in the near future to help support the open access journey for authors publishing under institutional agreements, and to help manage the OA business processes underpinning that support. So we heard briefly where each of us is in terms of our current practices to manage open access agreements during the introduction slides. But how have our approaches changed over the terms of the agreements? From initial setup discussions to early implementation, and through to, for some, the early expenditure of fee-free article allocations. Amy, can you talk a bit about how OhioLINK engages with Elsevier and other publishers around the development of workflows for capped agreements, and how the consortium supports each of the 3 OA approver cohorts and publisher workflows are iterated and improved?
Yes. Okay. So I gave you an idea of our framework, but that's, how we're distributing or allocating an equal amount of credits to each of the buckets. So there's equity and fairness across using those. However, the way we see our role at the consortial level is making sure that we're bringing value and all of our members are seeing value to the process. So on a regular basis, Joanna Voss, who is our Associate Director of Licensing and Analytics, is working with all of our approvers, and our approvers are working with their faculty members and marking challenges or difficulties or questions that they have about each vendor's particular process, because they're all slightly different. Right. When is that credit triggered? How is that credit getting assigned? Is it at publication approval? Is it at request? It all varies per publishers and can be quite challenging for someone to remember, especially a faculty. They don't want to know that, right? So our approvers and our librarians are trying to explain this. And what we felt we could do at OhioLINK is bring that feedback back to each of the vendors to help them work through what their processes is, because they're still trying to figure out what the best workflow is there and what business decisions need to be made about how this process is working internally for their teams, but also for their customers being both librarians and faculty members. So on a regular basis, monthly, I think at this point, I am meeting with each of our vendors that we have agreements with, and it's just a check-in on how is it going? Have you hit any speed bumps? Have you had any challenges? Is anything kind of stuck in the process? And then we talk through ways in which we can fix those and make them better. And let me be clear, we're not sitting, as much as I love my salespeople, we're not sitting down with the sales teams on this. We're talking to customer success managers, and they'll bring in product owners, if that's the case, or, members of their OA work team. So what we're saying and what we're working through isn't kind of lost in the shuffle and getting translated differently. And that has been really great, I think, for both sides. I shouldn't say sides, both organizations working together.
The different partners. Yeah, and I can jump in, and I can probably speak too much to all of this. So I'm really going to do my best to kind of break it down. So I might have a few notes that I might keep an eye on. But I think that what you were saying, Amy, just something that I think makes this type of agreement unique and a little bit different is the fact that agreement partners are working really closely with different teams, within kind of their publisher contacts. So people who are with that core sales team, so account managers, for example, certainly they do lead, the negotiation, renewal pieces of this, but customer success teams within different publishers do work really closely with agreement partners. And some of the workflows that are really critical, Again, our goal is always to ensure a very smooth and successful kickoff and implementation. And again, kind of going forward during the agreement, really to ultimately give your local corresponding authors the smoothest experience as an author, because we know that they're juggling a lot. They have a lot of demands every day. We know that librarians also have limited bandwidth. So kind of all of that is considered. So some of the things that are absolutely key at the beginning, the agreement setup is absolutely critical. So that is kind of very early before the agreement is launched and live and presented as an option to the authors. We do have an implementation team. So they're considering things like what is actually in that agreement, which journals are eligible, and all the work, Amy, that you and Joanna and OhioLINK did with figuring out what is the most logical breakdown, what are the different groups, which institutions are going to be in those groups, what volume of APCs makes sense, how do you split them across the groups. And I think what's really special and unique about this agreement is that OhioLINK led those decisions. So it wasn't, kind of a situation where the publisher is coming in saying, this is how this has to happen. So there is a lot of that flexibility and a lot of choice that I think, was determined early on. So once the agreement is in place, so that's a fantastic check mark that is done. Other things that certainly happen are the Elsevier platform that is used for managing the agreement over time is something called the EOAP. Maybe a little bit more detail than I need to get into now, but there's certainly training for approvers and that core team so that they can feel really comfortable and very knowledgeable with what their role is on the validation or approval side, but also so that they are very aware and knowledgeable, again, going back to what their local authors will experience, because there are different workflows that are certainly relevant and important to a capped agreement. And like Amy was saying, just those constant check-ins, those regular check-ins, communication is critical, having an open door to talk things over with each other. If there are pain points, let's talk about them, figure out how to make them better. We also love hearing about what's going really well. So kind of, the roses and the thorns, a bit of both. And from there, it's really just the regular check-ins, maintaining an eye on agreement uptake across the year. So that does go back to those regular check-ins to make sure that, we're all aware, with what's happening with the agreement and just what usage and interest looks like, which again is just a lot of communication. That's kind of a trend in all our conversations.
Thanks. What strikes me after listening to Amy and Shannon discuss the back office approaches are questions in my mind around the potential impact of where and how authors first learn about a capped agreement. Is it when they have an article accepted and expect fee-free OA and the agreement allocation has already been expended? Or are they even aware there is an agreement in the first place? For Ohio State, we hold regular campus information sessions and post communications via our campus news about our agreements and where we are with our caps. We also have dedicated web pages for our open access agreements that include that information. Brian, can you share how you are engaging with your campus authors and the impact, positive or negative, of capped agreements and what those might be from your perspective?
Yes, and I could say at least direct knowledge of Cincinnati and Case, they've been very similar in their approaches, and Clinic as well. I've had conversations with them. It's different than a lot of other services. So it's not just your marketing service. There's more of the communications is conversational about like what's included, what's not included. OhioLINK's done a great job of putting up web pages that guide the librarians, but also the authors. So we rely on those, and we're always pushing those out to people as well. But my colleagues at University of Cincinnati, the way they've approached it is they've done an open access workshops through faculty enrichment. They've done email blast, all the traditional liaison models the librarians are already using. And they also have a LibGuide with the opportunities of publishing available. Case has done very similar. We also took advantage of, we were currently working with the Faculty Senate about an open access policy. It wasn't a mandate, but it was a policy saying the library could harvest and put in the institutional repository. So at Case, we weren't faculty. So this was a way to get us into that faculty conversation and also push these deals deals in parallel while we were trying to get this policy passed. We also worked through Office of Research Administration just as another communication channel to push out the opportunities to publish. I think the biggest challenge with these large deals like this and having multiple deals going is that there's just a lot of questions like, which publishers do you have deals with? Because some, people might be shopping who to go with their research. Which journals specifically, all the way down to what article type is included. That we get that a lot. Like, is this included? Is that included? Is that not included? And then there's just general confusion among the authors because the language could be different from publisher to publisher. Like, of the author, which author has to be with the organization. Being based on the acceptance date, for example. So we've had a Turnaway alumnus that put in and said they're affiliated with Case Western. Well, I did my research at Case over a year ago. Yeah, but you're not with Case now when you put in the article request. I'm so sorry to break the news to you, but we're going to have to actually decline your article.
That's what's nice about working in a consortial environment, though, because you have colleagues and you're making these decisions together. So whenever Brian's talking about policy or the approvers or the resource committee at OhioLINK has made that decision, this is how we're going to define this section, because sometimes it's not up to the publisher, right? We get to more or less decide how or what we want to approve against. So that's been good. And we something to kind of combat the from one to another. We have a giant matrix with each publisher and some of the terms to kind of outline the differences in between for librarians. That we don't show that to faculty a lot.
I'd say there's another hidden impact for the library. So having these, several large deals with OhioLINK that we don't have to worry about. It's got some of the core publishers already wrapped up. We don't have to worry about those. At Case in Cincinnati, we've been able to reach out to the smaller publishers and societies, and learning from the big deals, we've now been able to do local deals from what we learned. Like, how do we communicate? What kind of things do we need to negotiate when we're setting these up? So it's been a nice jumping off platform to now start to localize some of the efforts where we didn't have an OA strategy yet. Now we can start building on the foundation that OhioLINK's already established with the multiple big deals.
Yeah. And maybe something I thought I might just jump in and add, and Amy, it was something you were mentioning a few minutes ago about how that ultimate decision is made with validating. So whether the APC request is either accepted or rejected. And certainly, within the scope of the agreement, the eligibility criteria that exists, that's defined. It's very transparent, whether it's on a page like the OhioLINK page. A publisher will also typically create, a public facing page about the agreement. So that's something else, that Elsevier does as one example. But at the end of the day, it is human beings. So it is the local approvers for the agreement who ultimately say yes or no. And just from supporting different agreement partners, we've definitely seen that sometimes local approvers, they'll have different criteria. So maybe certain things that are or aren't important, for library X compared to another one. So things like maybe the requirement to use an institutional email address, maybe that's a criteria because that simply supports more efficient, validation or verification of a person's identity as a corresponding author locally. So just things like that are things that in discussion, I know they've certainly come up, especially the email address one. And Maureen, is it okay if I just share something on how authors learn about the agreement?
Sure.
Yeah, because I know, Amy, you were mentioning the OhioLINK webpage, and I know OhioLINK librarians have done so much with promoting all of their agreements, and we've certainly seen that through the uptake of the agreement across the year. But again, on the author side, they really are learning about that option, I think most directly when they are going through the post-acceptance author journey. So again, their article has already been accepted for publication. They then receive an email where they're prompted to fill out their rights and access form. And it's during those several steps where they are prompted to identify whether they do want to publish via OA, again, through the agreement to leverage that as an option as an author, or to publish via subscription. So again, that choice, totally author-led, and then your team is notified, or the approvers are notified if they choose OA.
And Elsevier's process is slightly different than our other agreements process too. So there are a lot of idiosyncrasies around how this all works, and keeping it straight can be challenging, I think. Yeah. Sorry, Maureen, we went off script.
There's just so much to
Speaking-
talk about.
Speaking of idiosyncrasies and challenges, libraries and consortia are experiencing pain points around absorbing the ongoing and increasing OA work into our normal practices, while the processes are not yet routinized across our agreements. And CAPT agreements complicate the OA business processes for libraries and consortia, and I imagine for publishers as well, as they need workflows for managing the CAPs. The lack of standards across publishers, agreements, data providers, and our own library workflows is hampering the scalability and sustainability of our OA support. As we incrementally improve our OA workflows, what remains the biggest obstacle and what is working well? Could each of you briefly talk about maybe your biggest pain point and what one thing you want to highlight that's going well, briefly?
I'll speak to my experience at Case Western, because I was one of the director approvers there. And I think the largest challenge was just confirming the author affiliation is accurate and that they're giving the institution is getting the benefit of that article. You know, are they using the university's name? Are they using their, they often will use a center or department that might not work through the bibliometrics and the rankings. But the author affiliation was a big one. And, people wanting to use Gmail or something else because they just want to keep that communication line for life instead of just using their Case Western email address. And also and sometimes they would just avoid ORCID too as well, because they felt like they were being tracked in different ways. So I think that was the biggest challenge, is just getting people in that mode. And we weren't allowed to mandate anything. So it's just constantly saying, this is why we're doing it. It's not to be hard. It's not to give you an extra step, but we want you to get the benefit of the open access, but we need the university to see the benefit and impact as well.
Amy,
Go ahead.
did you
No,
want to
go-
jump in?
go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay. Just don't want to kind of dive into it too much. I know I'm to keep it short and sweet. I think one of the key things for us, I'm sure a lot of people have been hearing this week, that Elsevier is very open to open. And that's certainly true. But really the heart of that is truly just having conversations with all of the vendors, all of the publishers that everyone works with. Again, I previously worked as a librarian, academic librarian, for more than a decade, so I know what it's like to be in that space. And I think now is really a time where conversations are very encouraged, and open dialogue has to happen for some of those pain points to move forward. So certainly with us, reach out to your contacts, the people that you work with, and let us know where those pain points are, what could improve. And, we've had little things along the way that have certainly come up. Certain details may be important to one agreement partner, not so much to another. Always let the people who you're working with know. And the implementation teams, those technical teams, are often very willing to see how they can improve things. So that's a really important thing just to be mindful of.
Do you want me to go, or do you want to go and then I'll go? What's your pain point?
I'll give you my minute. You could go.
So I think for us, I mentioned this already, is that everything works slightly different. So keeping track of that and making sure that we're communicating any challenges when we hit them with the vendors or publishers. What's hard is, they're hearing from some of their other partners as well. So it's not like the world doesn't revolve around OhioLINK, although I would love that. I think the hard part is, they're trying to make business decisions that make sense for themselves and all of their customers. And we are, in theory, just part of their customer base. So trying to get to processes or trying to convince them to change a processes, and waiting to see how that plays through for their larger customer base. I think, yeah. So the email requirement has been a big thing. It would be super easy if everyone just would require an email from that particular institution, but there's particular vendors where that's technically a roadblock in some ways, especially over in Europe. And they requested not having something like that in Europe. So it's working through those types of business processes decisions, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. We want to make sure we have time for questions. So to conclude our panel, I'm going to ask one final question. I would like to focus on the future and what we might need to improve or to accelerate for the positive changes we want to see in this space. If you could change one thing in the next year or two to improve open access business processes and workflows, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing I'd like to see is more flexibility from the publishers, and I think OhioLINK has seen that with the 3 big deals we have, because we got a large group and can have a lot of influence. But more flexibility that can work directly with specifications for that consortia or the individual institutions instead of a all fits every institution model. And we've seen some of that, and they've all been very collaborative. But I'd like to see more of that flexibility as publishers roll out more of these deals that you can customize the process.
Data's still a little messy. And every publisher handles it a little bit differently. And Joanna and her team spend a lot of time working through data corrections on the back end. And, again, this is somewhat new, and publishers are standing up departments that are working through this. But we do need to get to a point where I don't have to double check to make sure that the allocation was put to the right cohort, or that publisher actually did get published or not published. So I'd like to see some more attention to data detail at the vendor level, or understanding of the data at the vendor level, instead of just hurrying up and sending me a report.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I know we've talked a little bit about it, and I've certainly heard about it from other agreement partners, is the reality is that when local approvers are validating APC requests, that certainly takes time. So on one hand, the advantage is that allows the approver and the team to stay really close to the agreement and to be, very aware of what agreement uptake looks like. But of course, it takes time. So again, the bandwidth challenge. Within certain agreements, certain publishers, I know there is that interest in kind of the automated approval approach. So I know that our OA team, that they are exploring that as an option. So that's something that, kind of moving forward as that is, explored more fully, that could be something to support or to address some of those pain points. I think the key too, again, regardless of the publisher, the vendor, the teams that work on these agreements behind the scenes, they're really committed to the platform and, again, supporting a smooth experience. So anytime that issues do come up, I think the key message is really communicate with your kind of publisher people. And they are often very willing to see what is and isn't possible, but sometimes it is possible. And if that could make your life easier and support a smoother experience as the people working very closely with it, then that certainly is a very positive thing.
Well, thank you, Amy, Brian, and Shannon. We'll now open it up for questions from the audience. And we do have a volunteer here with a microphone.
I'm Doug Lafreniere. I'm here on behalf of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Press. In these capped agreements, what happens after the caps are reached? What options do authors then have?
And Amy, do you want to start?
Yeah, it depends on the publisher, but quite honestly, and this is, again, making own local decisions and policies. For OhioLINK, it's for us as a resource committee, not just the offices. So these are our selection librarians, deciding that because of how funding happens on campus, with capped agreements, it does give them an opportunity to talk about that the library doesn't have a money tree growing in the back, and that we can just keep approving and paying for articles, right? So in a way, having that capped agreement maybe helps carry that message that, at some point, we're paying for this and this is how much we have money for. And if you would like more, then you need to start exploring other options, either, department funds or, even your own in some instances. So, but yeah, I mean, Maureen is actually really good about messaging out to her community about we reached our cap. So, if you want to publish something, you can maybe wait, or, Yeah,
it depends on the agreement, and but it also depends on the model that you're publishing. If you're publishing hybrid, you would have the option then to publish behind a paywall or to fund it in other ways. If you're publishing fully open access, one of the things that helps with agreements with fully open access journals is to approve at submission, so that the author at that back end on acceptance isn't left with no allocation left.
Yeah.
And with some publishers, there is a discount on APCs once a cap is reached, not with all. Yeah, but with one of our agreements, there is a discount on an APC if the author is using other funds outside of the agreement.
And maybe just to add to that,
So I've heard a lot of I've heard feedback from librarians that they don't like these because it doesn't allow them to have a uniform author experience. Basically, these capped agreements, it's first come, first served. So early publishing authors are always, they're the earlier you publish in the year, the more likely you are to have this benefit. Do you get those complaints?
Well, I mean, yes, but the flip side is just don't do them, right? Because we don't have enough money to do completely unlimited. So it's there's always going to be something that's a challenge, no matter what type of environment that you're stepping in. So, yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, and institutions, at least at OhioLINK, work through it in different ways, right? I don't dictate how they're working through those. Brian and Maureen are deciding what's happening on their campus on how to work through.
And I'd say the complaint's been more minimal than I expected. I think because we've been very proactive in communicating what these mean, what's going to happen, and they understand this was added. Like, the library was not providing these opportunities previously, and we needed to get into the space to really understand what's going to happen. And maybe in the future they won't be capped, but initially we had to get into the space and a financial model that we could support and see what happens and really get a sense of what the university is doing. Because we'd ask faculty and they wouldn't respond, like what they need, what's happening, and we're just relying on the bibliometrics to make all our decisions. So this now allowed us to get into that space and really understand, and hopefully in the future maybe we can go for a different model. But right now the complaints have been fairly minimal, and they're fairly understanding.
I know we had a few other hands.
and maybe just super quickly, again, from kind of my side of the house, so to speak, what I've heard a lot is authors are really appreciating having choices. So just author choice. But again, with a capped agreement, it could mean reaching that point. Again, I don't work in the world of account managers, but again, just a shout out to them. If anyone is ever at that point, they would be that person to reach out to talk about options, and options do exist. So again, it's really just determining it's what makes sense for your institution and for your agreement. But those discussions certainly could always happen.
I mean, it's somewhat anecdotal, but I have seen a lot of, I'll have younger faculty members reaching out to me and thanking me for setting this up for them, because otherwise they would have never had an opportunity to go ahead and publish in this way. So it isn't just the well-funded high-end researchers that are hurrying up and plowing through those credits. We are seeing a nice disbursement across the spectrum of faculty members. Sorry, I know there's a question over there.
Okay. My question follows up closely to this. I'm Mark Robinson. I'm at Notre Dame, and we have one capped agreement, and we're about to start two more. And we're kind of nervous about whether we need to have a policy now. So we're very explicit that when we're out, and we're not going to buy any discounted APC bundles. Do you all make it that explicit? Like, is it a policy on a webpage, or do different campuses
At
handle it
Ohio
differently?
State, we're very explicit, and with the OhioLINK agreements, OhioLINK is very explicit on their web pages. Ohio State does have 4 capped agreements. We only advertise 3. We have a capped agreement where we don't ever say it's capped, because we will cover over. If we reach the cap, we would cover it. So for our authors, it doesn't make any difference. So we don't put that out there. But for our capped agreements, we're very clear. And we start, communicating as soon as we know that there's a possibility that we'll reach the cap. We'll put out, like, we have, 30% left, and there's, 20% left of the year. Right now we have one that's, we have 10% left, and there's 13% left of the year. And also being very explicit about the eligibility criteria and sticking to it.
Yeah.
So being very clear, is it at acceptance? Do they have to be affiliated? Do you have to be accepted within a certain time frame? Does you have to submit in a certain time frame? And being very clear and sticking to it so the rules are fair for everyone.